And what is going on? It is time to break down and predict this weekend's fight card. UFC on ESPN Plus 7, and it's going to be headlined by Alistair Overeem and Alexey Oleinik. Yo, this fight card is not the most stacked, clearly because we're coming off of a pay-per-view over the last weekend, and it had two of the best fights of the year on the main event. So this fight card has a lot to live up to. That was a hard card to follow. But just in this main event, we have over 130 professional fight experience. Alistair Overeem has about 61 professional fights, and Alexey Oleinik has about 70 professional fights. 7-0, between these two fighters. We got some experience in the main event. One of these guys is the most decorated strikers in the UFC and arguably MMA's heavyweight division of all time, Alistair Overeem. You've got the UFC's most decorated grappler, submission specialist, I should say, Alexey Oleinik from the heavyweight division. This guy's got 56 professional wins, 44 of those by way of submission. This is a clash of veteran styles, and I cannot wait for this main event. But that's going to be the final fight we break down. Let's jump into the entire main card. Let's take a look. We got Alistair Overeem versus Alexey Oleinik. Islam Makhachev versus I'm not going to fuck up his name. Versus Arman. Sergei Pavlovich versus Marcelo, another heavyweight scrap. Ivan Strierkov versus Devin Clark he trains with Jackson Wink. Roxanne Modafferi versus Antonina Shevchenko. It's lit. Antonina Shevchenko is back. She's going to be taking on the Happy Warrior Roxanne Modafferi. My prediction, I don't think the Happy Warrior is going to be too happy after this Saturday. And then, of course, we start off the main card with Krzysztof Jotko versus Alen Amedovski. That's going to be the first fight we break down today. So let's get straight into it. Krzysztof Jotko is 19-4 as a professional. Alen Amedovski is 8-0, undefeated. Krzysztof Jotko is 6-4 in the UFC, but currently riding a 3-fight losing streak to David Branch, Uriah Hall, and Brad Tavares. His opponent, Alen Amedovski, is undefeated at 8-0, but taking this fight on super short notice. As a matter of fact, you can still see on the UFC's website, it says opponent to be decided. But his opponent will be Alen Amedovski. I'm taking Jotko to win this fight. Krzysztof has 10 fights in the UFC, and he has about 3 times the experience as his opponent, who is taking this fight on short notice and making his UFC debut, and has never fought anyone as experienced or as skilled as Krzysztof Jotko. So let's get the green check mark on the screen and get it away from TBD. We're going to be picking Krzysztof Jotko to win the first fight of the main card. Moving on to the first WMMA bout on the main card, Antonina Shevchenko versus Roxanne Modafferi. I don't know what the hell I just clicked. I literally clicked this fight. You guys see? You see this? Look. I click on Krzysztof Jotko versus Alen Amedovski. Brings up the fight, right? I click on Roxanne Modafferi, Antonina Shevchenko. What the fuck? I think I broke the UFC's website, you guys. Matchup stats? Alright, either way, I don't need the UFC's website to break down this fight. Antonina Shevchenko is who I'm going to be picking to win. I can't even get her on the screen. Like, alright, there's an Antonina Shevchenko. We'll just put the check mark by her head right here, in between big and little Antonina. Alright. So, with that being said, let's get into the breakdown. For this fight, I'm taking Antonina Shevchenko. Roxanne Modafferi has a lot of MMA experience at 22-15, so she does have a small submission chance to win this fight. But Antonina Shevchenko is related to and trains with Valentina Shevchenko, who's pound for pound one of the best female fighters on the planet. And Antonina has been over in the kickboxing world dominating, while Valentina's been over here kicking girls' ass in MMA dominating this world. If anyone's going to beat Antonina Shevchenko, it's going to be a girl like Tatiana Suarez in my mind, maybe a Jessica Andrade, somebody that's going to be really skilled and will be able to get the fight to the floor, the mat, and keep it there. If you can't keep this fight on the mat, I think Antonina Shevchenko will be able to just stand back up, start picking you apart on the feet, it's going to be hard to find, even at the top of the division, even in the top 5, it's going to be hard to find girls that can match up with Antonina Shevchenko as far as the striking is concerned. And even her grappling is better than you might imagine. You saw her Dana White's Tuesday Night Contender Series fight. You did hear the commentator pointing out something about maybe there's 1 or 2 things she could work on. But you have to imagine that was her coming back to MMA after dominating in kickboxing for a while. Clearly, you're not going to transition flawlessly from sport to sport back to the other. You know, we saw Gokhan Saki come over here, get knocked out by Khalil Roundtree. Shit does happen, especially in MMA. And so that's why in this fight, I do like Antonina Shevchenko's chances, but I'm not going to count Roxanne all the way out. Now, Roxanne is 22-15. That's not the prettiest record. She's only 1-2 in the UFC. So, I'm just leaving a small window of opportunity open for her to win this fight. It's hard for me to envision her being the girl that beats Antonina Shevchenko, hands Antonina her first loss. But the fact that she has almost 40 professional fights, she definitely has some MMA grappling experience, which could be useful against someone like Antonina Shevchenko. But as I said earlier, it's not just about if you can get the fight to the mat once or twice, can you keep it there? And I think Antonina Shevchenko is skilled enough to get back to her feet where she is a specialist. So I'm taking Antonina Shevchenko to win this fight, and now hopefully the UFC's website is fixed as we move to the next father trucker. It's not. Alright, UFC's website, you guys are officially... I already didn't like the new website, but hey, it is what it is. Alright, so we've got some interest... You know what? Let's just go back to the original screen, since the UFC's website is not functioning correctly. We will just go to the screen where you can see who the fighters are and the entire fight card, which is where we started off. But usually if you click on the fighters, it gives you a little more in-depth breakdown of the fight. But right now, the UFC's website is having some issues. Now, with that being said, the next fight we are going to is going to be between... Oh, hey, look, Islam Makhachev worked. The next fight we're going to is going to be between, actually, we have, let's see, Devin Clark fighting out of Jackson Wink, taking on Ivan Shatirkov, who I believe is also making his UFC debut. So we'll get into this breakdown. And alright, we're just going to break down this next fight from the main page, because the UFC's fighter pages are down. The new website's trash. We've talked about that ad nauseum. So another topic for another day. Let's get straight into Ivan Shatirkov versus Devin Clark. Hopefully I didn't butcher that name. With that being said, Devin Clark is 3-3 in the UFC, winning 3 decisions and being finished in all 3 of his losses. He's lost to the toughest competition he's fought so far, but he does have more UFC experience than his opponent, who's making his UFC debut undefeated at 16-0-1. Now, as far as who I'm going to be picking to win this fight, let's get the green check mark on the correct side. I am going to be taking Ivan Shatirkov to win this fight, but this is a tough fight for me to call. Shatirkov has been fighting in the RCC, and he's coming off of wins over Fabio Maldonado and Thiago Silva, both who are UFC veterans, but past their primes. But they are still skilled fighters. Ivan hasn't been fighting UFC caliber competition as far as guys that could fight in the UFC today, but Devin Clark will be fighting to prove he is UFC caliber competition in this fight. So it's almost a toss-up for me. I would be picking Devin Clark to win this fight if he had beat any of the guys he lost to in the UFC, because I don't think Ivan is ready for the top 15 of the UFC per se. But I do think he might be able to win his UFC debut here against Devin Clark. It's really almost a toss-up for me because Devin does have the UFC experience and trains with other UFC caliber fighters at Jackson Wink. But Ivan is undefeated, and I'm not sure if Devin Clark will be the one to crack that code. So I'm going to give the slight edge to Ivan Shatirkov, but like I said, 50-50 almost for me. So we will move on to the next fight of the night between Marcelo and Sergei Pavlovich, and hopefully the UFC's website will work for this one. Let's check it out. It worked. Whew, it worked. All right. Sergei Pavlovich versus Marcelo Golem. This one was actually a little easier for me to break down. The only reason I'm really giving Marcelo Golem a chance to win this fight, so clearly, I'm picking Sergei Pavlovich. The only reason I'm giving Marcelo Golem a chance to win this fight is because, for one, this is MMA, but for two, these dudes are heavyweight. Sergei Pavlovich was undefeated at 12-0 before coming to the UFC and losing his UFC debut to Alistair Overeem, and he was fighting against decent competition. Marcelo Golem is no Alistair Overeem. Marcelo Golem was fighting cans before entering the UFC, where he's 1-2 against guys that will probably never crack the top 15. So I'm taking Pavlovich unless Marcelo Golem lands a lucky punch or a submission. So for sure taking Pavlovich in this fight. Yeah, Marcelo Golem's going to need I wouldn't say a miracle, but he's going to need to find a finish. He's probably going to need Sergei to make a mistake in this fight. Moving on to the co-main event of the evening. We've got Islam Makhachev versus Arman Tsarukyan. God, these names are so crazy. Islam Makhachev is 5-1 in the UFC, and I mean crazy to pronounce, not like fucking crazy as in the name. Islam Makhachev is 5-1 in the UFC, and probably one of the best unranked fighters in the UFC's stacked lightweight division. He's currently riding a 4-fight winning streak against guys like Chris Wade, Nick Lentz, Gleison Tebow, and Cajun Johnson. He'll be fighting Arman Tsarukyan, who's 13-1 at only 22 years old, and making his UFC debut riding a 12-fight winning streak in promotions that I've never really heard of, but actually against experienced guys with decent records. Usually, if I see Islam Makhachev fighting against a guy I don't recognize, I assume I'm just picking Islam Makhachev to win the fight, which I actually am picking Islam to win this fight. I'm giving him the edge, but I actually do have a little bit of cause for pause because Arman isn't just fighting cans outside of the UFC. I'm still giving the edge to Islam Makhachev because he's been fighting higher level competition and he's still one of those Dagestani killers from the mountains of Khabib. So I'm picking Islam Makhachev to win this fight in the co-main event. I don't know if this is going to put a ranking beside his name, but this guy is so fucking close to being ranked, it's unreal. I'm going to assume Arman Tsarukyan is taking this fight on short notice, because if you're Islam Makhachev, you're probably trying to forward your career at this point. You want to fight guys that'll help you get up in the rankings, move up to the top 15, because he already deserves to be there. I mean, he's like literally scratching the top 15. Now, the division is so stacked, there's probably another guy that's ranked 15 who also deserves that spot. But Islam, I think, should be fighting a guy to break into the top 15, and instead he's fighting against a guy who's taking this fight on short notice, that no one really knows of. So this is a win that should be there for Islam Makhachev. But hey, keep your eyes on Arman. He has been fighting experienced dudes outside of the UFC. I just don't know if they're UFC caliber. So with that being said, moving on to the main event of the evening. Holy smokes. The boa constrictor Alexey Oleinik versus the Demolition Man, Alistair Overeem. These are guys whose names fit them very well. Alexey Oleinik, the boa constrictor, has 57 professional wins and 44 of those have came by way of submission. Alistair Overeem, the Demolition Man, has 44 professional MMA wins, 61 professional MMA fights, and that's not even counting the striking competitions, the kickboxing, none of that. So these dudes are experienced. Like I said in the very beginning of this breakdown, there's over 130 fights between these two dudes in just MMA. Alistair Overeem is a living legend in combat sports. He's the most decorated striker in the UFC's heavyweight division with over 60 pro MMA fights. Alexey Oleinik actually might arguably be the most decorated submission specialist in the UFC's heavyweight division with his 44 wins via submission, and at least 12 of those have came by way of Ezekiel choke. This is a veteran clash of styles and experience with over 130 pro fights between two fighters. Overeem is 3-2 in his last 5 fights, only losing to studs Francis Ngannou and Curtis Blades, who he now trains with actually. but he beat the likes of Mark Hunt, Fabricio Verdum, and most recently Sergei Pavlovich. Alexey Oleinik is 4-1 in his last 5 fights, only losing to Curtis Blades and picking up wins over Travis Brown, Junior Albini, and Mark Hunt, most recently. With that being said, I'm picking Alistair Overeem to win this fight. Of course, that's if he can avoid being submitted, but Alistair Overeem already has an advantage on the feet, which is where the fight starts. Now he's been training with Elevation Fight Team and the likes of Curtis Blades, who's one of the best wrestlers in the heavyweight division, which should make it really difficult for Alexey to get the fight to the ground and find the submission. Now, we have seen him just like walk up to dudes, clinch up with them, and pull guard, and straight into an Ezekiel choke. But I don't know if you're going to be able to do that against somebody as experienced as Alistair Overeem, who's also going to have a slight weight advantage in this fight. So I'm picking Alistair Overeem to win in the main event. Let's get the green check mark by his head. Boom. We got Alistair Overeem. With that being said, man, it is what it is. This is the breakdown and predictions for UFC on ESPN Plus 7. Alexey Oleinik versus Alistair Overeem. If you are looking for any sort of betting advice, gambling advice, stuff like that, we definitely cover straight bets for MMA over on Patreon, and we've actually been doing really well for the last 2 years. So with that being said, if you're interested in that, check out the links in the description. Other than that, I hope you enjoyed the breakdown. It is what it is. Let the full-time family know what you think in the comments. I'm out.
This is #1 bullshit.